Hello everyone, my name is Derek, webmaster of Gematrinator.com, author of the Gematrinator Excel application, and frequent guest on Zachary K. Hubbard's Gematria Effect radio show on truthfrequencyradio.com. This presentation is tailored for both newcomers to the study of Gematria and those who have already been enlightened. In it, I will be revealing the building blocks of Gematria and showing how it is tied directly into mathematics and the English language. I will talk about Saturn, why it's worshipped, and how to spot instances in which it is paid tribute. I will also be discussing some very basic but very crucial concepts of numerology and explain why certain numbers are so important. Once that's established, we will begin to look at how these numbers helped build the United States, our current Gregorian calendar, and examples of Gematria used by those who translated the texts of the Bible to English. Once that's complete, we will begin looking at some more contemporary establishments in our modern-day societal infrastructure and expose how these numbers are still used today as part of the ongoing deception and mockery in our news media, sports, and perhaps the boldest liars of all, NASA. It's called Geometry, Gematria, Numerology, and the Manufactured Reality. Subtitle, Everybody Loves Saturn. The foundation of the connection between Gematria and geometry is the circle. Now, to get the pi character on your keyboard, you use the key code Alt227, and this is no coincidence. The equation 22 divided by 7 gives you a number that's very close to pi. It's just over 1/1000th off. It would take 790 units of measure before you're off by just 1. Gematria is the ancient practice of coding numbers into words, but it is not restricted to ancient times. The first Gematria cipher we will look at is the simplest, most basic, English ordinal. In this system, each letter is assigned a number associated with its position in the alphabetic order. When using this cipher and writing out the exact equation we just looked at, you'll find a familiar result, 314. Like how pi equals 3.14. A circle is made up of 360 degrees. The only other shape that is made up of 360 degrees on its interior corners is the square. Now the number 360, when written out, equals 227, like the equation you used to get the circle. The second significant cipher we will discuss is English reduced. In this cipher, each letter is reduced to a single digit before being added to the equation. So J becomes 1 instead of 10 because 1 plus 0 equals 1, and K becomes 2 because 1 plus 1 equals 2, and so on and so forth. So let's look at some of the properties of the number 227. It's the 49th prime number, and in octal, which is base 8 instead of base 10, 227 translates to 343. And this is very interesting because 7 times 7 equals 49, and 7 times 7 times 7 equals 343. 77, when written out in English reduced, equals 49. And the first number that sums to 314 in English ordinal is 777. Our country appears to be founded on these principles as well. Washington, the capital, sums to 49 in English reduced, and Washington, D.C. is on the 77th meridian. And September 11th, the most significant event to happen there, equals 77 in English reduction. The octal numbering system, in which 8s and 9s do not exist, reveals something fascinating about our standard base 10 system. So just look at the numbers we've discussed to this point. 227 is the octal of 151. But look at 77, which in octal is 115. And meanwhile, the octal of its inverse, 511, is 777. Adding these numbers, 151 plus 115 plus 511, gives us 777. And this is the only time I will be mentioning the septenary Gematria cipher during this presentation, but as you can see, it goes from 1 to 7 and then back down to 1. And this is interesting for the number 7 because in this system, it equals 22. Next, let's take a look at the Gematria of the planet Saturn. The next cipher I'll be using is Jewish, which is significant for its ability to produce much larger numbers. In this system, Saturn equals 511. And this number, as we just saw, is 777 in octal, but it is also the octal of 329. And looking at the properties of this number, one glimpse shows us that the 329th prime number is 2207. In numerology, zeros are ignored, giving us a direct relation to 227. For this slide, I want to look at a standard die. Now when we add together the three sets of numbers that are across the cube from one another, we get a 7 each time. Of course, 7 plus 7 plus 7 equals 21. Using this English reduced method that we just looked at, Saturn equals 21, just like dice in ordinal. And using English ordinal, Saturn sums to 93. Reverse Gematria is just about as meaningful as the standard ciphers. It's every bit as simple as you might think. Reverse ordinal just flips the alphabet around so that Z is 1, Y is 2, all the way through A as 26. Using these numbers, Saturn equals 69. This chart too can be reduced to a single digit, which gives the reverse reduced cipher. So for example, K equals 16, so 1 plus 6 equals 7. D equals 23, so 2 plus 3 equals 5. In this system, Saturn equals 42. One more relevant cipher I'll mention is English, which I will often refer to as full English Gematria during the video. This one can also give us very large numbers. It is based off of the standard Hebrew and Greek charts, but uses the present-day alphabetic order, unlike the Jewish version. Let's take a look at the magic square of Saturn. Each planet has its own magic square with various sizes. Saturn's is 3 by 3. Whether we add a row, a diagonal, or a column, we get a 15 each time. By following these numbers 1 through 9 and tracing our path, we get a shape known as the sigil of Saturn. Summing all of the numbers in the square gives us 45, the 9th triangular number. But this sigil gives us the shape we can see on the seal of Saturn, worn by many occultists, and is the source of the double X seen in symbols for Freemasonry and Judaism. The X also makes a subtle appearance in the outline of an hourglass, as Saturn has always been revered as the keeper of time. Next, we'll look at the cube of Saturn. Cube of Saturn equals 777 in Jewish Gematria. Here, we can add any three numbers that appear as a straight or diagonal line through all three dimensions, and also simply any row or column on any of the three planes, and get a sum of 42, as the example here shows. Saturn equals 42 in reverse reduced. The 42nd triangular number is 903, reminding us of how Saturn equals 93 in English ordinal. Another number related to 42 is 96, and we get this by adding all of the numbers that 42 is divisible by. This is called the sum of divisors. The word Freemason sums to 42 in English reduced and 96 in English ordinal. Some of you may be familiar with this big black cube and its many duplicates around the world. In Mecca, Muslim worshippers who traveled there will even walk circles around the cube, as if they themselves were the rings of Saturn. In English ordinal, the black cube equals 93. Many traditional practitioners of the Jewish faith wear black cubes on their forehead and left bicep during morning prayer. These objects are called tefillin, which equals 42 in reduced. The roots of Gematria can be traced back to the Hebrew and Greek languages, so it's important to understand the parallels that exist between the god they worshipped and how those numbers stack up to our current alphabet. 7 is an inverted reflection of the letter L. The Hebrew letter Lamed is representative of the god El, who was the father of heaven, or in a literal sense, Saturn. This is reflected in various references to God in the Old Testament, such as El, Elohim, Elohai, and El Shaddai. The Hebrew letter Lamed has a striking similarity to the current-day astrological symbol for Saturn. The letter Lamed, when printed, actually looks almost exactly like a 7. And the heaviest common metal, lead, is a base metal. It too shares symbolism with Saturn, which is said to rule the base chakra, representing the most reptilian of a human's instincts. Now the 7th prime number is 17, and God in English reduced sums to 17, as does L in English ordinal. 7 times 17 equals 119, and this is a number of great significance that we will be covering in a little bit. In Hebrew, El is written Aleph Lamed. These two letters are actually made up of other letters in the Hebrew alphabet, each of which have their own gematria values, and when adding them up, we may very well have found the reason our English alphabet has 26 letters. Aleph is made up of Yod Vav Yud, whose values sum to 26. Lamed is made up of Vav and Kaf, which also sums to 26. As the first and 12th letters, Aleph and Lamed both begin their half of the Hebrew alphabet, as seen here. Another common reference to God in the Old Testament is the Tetragrammaton, spelled YHWH, often referred to as Yahweh or Jehovah. This is spoken as Yod-He Vav-He, the values of which also sum to 26, and 17 using the Katan method, which is similar to English reduced. God equals 26 in English ordinal and 17 in English reduced. A less significant cipher that we'll look at is Sumerian. This is English ordinal, but everything is multiplied by 6. In this system, Saturn equals 558. 558 in the octal numbering system is 1056. God in Sumerian Gematria equals 156. By looking at 156, we see that the 156th prime number is 911, an inverse of the 119 that we saw before. 119 is similar to 227, as their 3 digits each sum to 11. By transposing the unique digit, we can create 3 different numbers each, and when adding them together, we get 1221 for both. 1221 is very significant astrologically, as it signifies the end of the winter solstice and marks the time at which the sun stops moving south. This is the end of Sagittarius, which is followed by Capricorn, ruled by our planet of affection, Saturn. Saturn is the only celestial body that rules 2 consecutive signs of the zodiac, the first of which is Capricorn, which ends on January 19th, a date that can also be written as 119. The next cipher we'll discuss is Francis Bacon Gematria, which is rooted in Freemasonry. This is the only current known relevant cipher to account for the capitalization of letters and assign them different values. This cipher is simple. It's the same as English ordinal, but with 26 added for each capital letter, meaning the capital A through capital Z is 27 through 52. Saturn equals 119 in Francis Bacon Gematria, as does USA. Now, there are conflicting measurements of Saturn's equatorial diameter, but in the middle of that range is 119,000 kilometers. 119 kilometers equals 74 miles. We'll see how that number plays in shortly. But 119 is the gematria value of several pertinent phrases, many more than just what's listed here. The 314th day in leap years, which is written 1109, even sums to 1109 in Jewish gematria, as you can see here with the equation for November 9th. Saturn is the sixth planet from the Sun. A six-pointed star, like the one that represents Judaism, is called a hexagram. Both Judaism and hexagram in English ordinal equals 77. Of course, the hexagram is what's on the Israeli flag, known as the Star of David. And Star of David in English ordinal equals 119. Saturn and the Moon are directly related. But before we get to the real interesting part, let's look at this relation in gematria. Saturn and Moon both sum to 21, and the Moon goes through a cycle of phases, while Saturn governs the cycle of time. Luna, the Moon's actual name, sums to 12, like the number of months in a year. But even better is the gematria for lunar, which is 21, 33, 66, and 69 in reverse ordinal, just like Saturn. Cancer is the only astrological sign ruled by the Moon, and its symbol is a 69. Gemini gives way to Cancer on June 20th, which equals 69 in reverse reduced. And Cancer's rule ends on 7/22. As we begin to explore NASA later on, you'll see why we should be skeptical of any of these measurements. But regardless of whether or not they are true, we are either looking at a massive cosmic synchronicity that would explain why Saturn is worshipped, or we're looking at numbers designed to worship Saturn. I'll let you decide. But take a look at this. The width of the Sun is just under 1.4 million kilometers. The width of the Moon is just under 3,500 kilometers. This means that the Sun is exactly 400 times larger than the Moon, and the Moon is 0.25% the size of the Sun. The Moon's perigee, which is the point at which it is closest to Earth, is a little over 369,000 kilometers. The Sun's perihelion, which is the closest it comes to Earth, is about 147 million kilometers. That means that the Sun is 398 times further away from the Earth than the Moon. And this also explains why the Moon is sometimes larger than the Sun and sometimes smaller than the Sun during a solar eclipse. But here's the interesting part. The lunar orbital period around Earth is 29.53049 days, and that's the synodic period, which measures the orbit from our perspective on Earth in relation to the Sun. Saturn's orbital period is 29.45778 Earth years. This difference is just 0.25%, or 1 in 398. That means the Moon takes the same number of days to orbit the Earth as the number of years Saturn does. And it is off by just 0.25%. But that's the exact same percentage as both the Moon's size and distance in relation to the Sun. Let's talk quickly about perfect numbers. A perfect number is one whose divisors sum to double the number itself. So in this case, 28 times 2 equals 56, matching the sum of divisors of 1, 2, 4, 7, 14, and 28. 28 is the second perfect and seventh triangular number. Its prime factors are 2 times 2 times 7. Every perfect number is also a triangular number. The number 6 is the third, 28 is the seventh, 496 is the 31st, and 8,128 is the 127th. The next perfect number is over 33 million. But also look at how those triangular numbers are each primes themselves: 3, 7, 31, and 127. Those are the second, fourth, 11th, and 30th primes. This graph shows 4 of the most important integer sequences: prime numbers, triangulars, square numbers, and the Fibonacci sequence. The Fibonacci sequence does not intersect with prime numbers. The closest they get is at 8, where the 8th Fibonacci is 21, and the 8th prime is 19. But the Fibonacci sequence does intersect with the other 2 sequences. First, let's look at the number 55. Notice the prime factorization of 5 times 11, much like how Saturn equals 511. 55 is the 10th Fibonacci and the 10th triangular number. In English Gematria, Satan equals 10 in reduced and 55 in ordinal. In reverse Gematria, God equals these same 2 numbers. As above, so below. When written out, 55 shares the same Gematria as the other intersected number, 144, which is 108. Is this a coincidence? Consider that the word geometry sums to 108 in both ordinal and reverse ordinal. Just 0.8%, or 8 in 1,000 words in the English language have the same value forwards and backwards. Now moving on to 144. First, let's look again at the Jewish cipher, and we see that time equals 144. And of course, this is no coincidence. First of all, 144 represents the intersection of the base 8 octal and base 12 duodecimal systems with our standard base 10, as 144 is the octal of 100, and in duodecimal, 144 equals 100. Next, see how the 144th triangular number reflects upon itself. 10,440 is, of course, 144 when the zeros are dropped. Now we can see here how the Fibonacci sequence matches up with square numbers at this point, since 144 is the 12th Fibonacci number, and its square root is also 12. All of this information certainly makes me wonder whether or not the surface gravity of Saturn, which is listed at 10.44 meters per second, is an honest assessment, especially considering how this translates to exactly 34.3 feet per second, 343 as you may recall being 7 cubed. The last compelling number shown on this page is 144's sum of divisors, which is 403. Glancing at the properties of 403, we see that the prime factorization is 13 times 31. This is the sign of Capricorn, one of the signs that Saturn rules on the zodiac, an amphibious goat with long horns. Next to that symbol is a statue of the Greek god known as Pan, who represented Saturn in ancient paganism. He too had a pair of goat horns and a pair of goat legs to go along with his sturdy phallic region. Pan is now the name of one of Saturn's many moons. The reduced and ordinal gematria of Pan is 13 and 31, respectively, just like cube. Jacob, a prominent figure in Genesis whose name later became Israel, also has this sum. Here are a few more 1331 words. Strangely enough, there were exactly 131 of these in the English dictionary. But perhaps more noteworthy is how L equals 13 in ordinal Hebrew gematria and 31 in standard. So let's take a look at the number 1331. The first thing that stands out is its prime factorization of 11 times 11 times 11. 11 plus 11 plus 11 equals 33, and this might explain part of the Masonic obsession with that number. But how about the prime number relationship? The 1331st prime number is 10,957. That's the exact number of days in 360 months. Saturn equals 30 in single reduction, which is a cipher that's the same as reduced, but where S equals 10. S is the 19th letter, so it's the only one you need to reduce twice to get to a single digit, since 1 plus 9 equals 10. But Saturn's orbital period is said to be 10,759 days, which is the same number with the 7 and 9 transposed. Also interesting is that 3 decades equals our favorite, 227 in reverse ordinal. As we saw before, Saturn equals 93 in English ordinal, so let's examine this number more closely. First, notice how 93 is 135 in the octal system, which is vital as each interior angle of an octagon is 135 degrees. 135 reduces to 9 by adding 1 plus 3 plus 5. It's worth mentioning that in geometry, the interior angles of all two-dimensional shapes, when equal to one another, will always reduce to 9. But also look at the divisors of 93, which read 1, 3, and 31, much like 1331. There are 3 numbers that sum to 1331 in Gematria, the first being 133. Saturn's sidereal rotation period is estimated at 11 hours, but it's actually 10 hours and 33 minutes. The second number is 331, which looks very much like the prime factorization of 93, 3 times 31. Finally, the last number is 393, which is the value of such words as president, capitalist, and confederation. The reflection of 93 is 39. It has divisors of 13, 3, and 1, and a prime factorization of 3 times 13. 133 plus 313 plus 331 also equals 777. X equals 144, the number of time in Sumerian Gematria, and gives us the shape of the aforementioned hourglass, which sums to 39 in reduced. H is the 8th letter and bears a resemblance to these other objects. The main digits of pi, 3 plus 1 plus 4, add up to 8, and timekeeper sums to both 309 in Jewish and 133 in Francis Bacon. America shares the same gematria with circle, 32 in reduced and 50 in ordinal. 32, when written out, equals 50 in reduced. In geometry, when an isosceles triangle has a unique 32-degree angle, its base angles must both be 74 degrees. The Sun's aphelion, the point at which it is the furthest from the Earth, occurs on July 4th, written 7-4 each year. Now when we take the 3 main digits of pi, rearrange them into each possible order, and add them together, we get the sum of 1,776. Thus, the United States of America was established on 7-4-1776. There are also 1,776 hours in 74 days, and Independence Day even sums to 74 in reduced. When we break this year down into small chunks, we find some incredible parallels to the ringed planet we're becoming so familiar with. First off, 1 plus 7 plus 7 plus 6 equals 21, like Saturn in reduced. 17 plus 7 plus 6 equals 30, like Saturn with the S exception. 17 plus 76 equals 93, like Saturn in ordinal. Now, 1 plus 77 plus 6 and 1 plus 7 plus 76 equals 84. United States of America equals 84 in reduced. And as we covered before, USA and Saturn both have the same Francis Bacon gematria of 119. The average distance from the Sun from Saturn is said to be 888.2 million miles, and 888 times 2 equals 1,776. Now the numbers discussed to this point also help piece our calendar together. First, notice how 227 miles is 365 kilometers. The date written 119 is January 19th, which sums to 93 in reverse reduced. The 33rd day of the year is February 2nd. 33 in Gematria equals 66 and 156, matching the Gematria of February 2nd. The 49th day, the final of Aquarius and of Saturn's rule, is 218. 18th of February equals 218 in ordinal. The date written 227 is February 27th, which sums to 1776 in Sumerian. The 77th day of the year is 318, a number directly related to 227, which we will discuss soon. March 18th equals 144 in ordinal, and 18th of March sums to 93 in reduced. The 93rd day of the year is April 3rd, which sums to 115 in ordinal and 511 in full English Gematria. The 119th day of the year shares the same Gematria as the USA, as April 29th and United States of America both sum to 84 in reduced and 228 in ordinal. Independence Day has familiar Gematria. July 4th sums to 156. The date that leaves 119 days in the year is written 9/3, and 3rd of September equals 93 with the S exception. The date that leaves 93 days in the year is the 29th of September, which equals 1776 in Sumerian. The date leaving 77 days in the year is written 10/15. 77 in the octal numbering system is 115. Also notice its triangular relationship. The 77th triangular number is 3003. But 15th of October sums to 93 in reduced Gematria. The date written 11/30 leaves 31 days left in the year, which is the 11th prime number. And November 30th is the only date that sums to 1331 in Jewish Gematria. Saturnalia begins on the 351st day of the year. 351 is the 26th triangular number, just like God equals 26. And the day it begins, December 17th, sums to 93 with the S exception. This next section will touch on the use of Gematria and numerology in the Bible. I want to be clear that nothing I'm presenting should be interpreted as trivializing the significance of the scriptures. The Bible was of course not authored in English, nor were the verses originally numbered. For the first example, let's break down Exodus 3:14. This is the first verse in the Bible where God reveals his name to Moses, as he states, "And God said unto Moses, I am that I am." This phrase sums to 314 in English ordinal, and God's name equals 227 in Jewish. Exodus relates to pi in Gematria, as both can sum to 25. Fittingly, this entire verse in single reduction equals 496. This is our third perfect number. We've been discussing 22 divided by 7, but what about 7 divided by 22? That equals 0.318 repeating. Here we see that the 318th prime number is 2111. The second coming of Christ is mentioned 318 times in the New Testament. John 21:11 is the story about the miraculous catch of 153 fish. 21 times 11 equals 231, which is the octal of 153. 153 is the 17th triangular number, one of the God numbers I've brought up. Here we see all sorts of connections to the 30th prime number, 113. First off, 153 equals 113 in reduced. This is written as an 153 in some texts, which also equals 113. Also summing to 113 is 318 and miraculous catch of fish. In Jewish Gematria, 153 and fish both result in 113 as well. Jesus Christ in English ordinal sums to 151, which, as we covered before, is 227 in the octal numbering system. The third and final example is one of the most famous Bible verses. The book of Revelation has 22 chapters and is the 66th and final book of the Bible. Revelation equals 49 in English reduced and 121 in ordinal. Both of these are square numbers, the 7th and 11th. Here is Revelation 13:18. 13 times 18 equals 234, which when added to its inverse, 432, sums to 666. 1318 sums to 91 in reduced, which is the 13th triangular number, and 133 in octal. As for the verse itself, here is wisdom equals 66 and 147. 147 equals 223 in octal. 223 and its variations are very popular numbers. They can be traced to the name for the rulers during the time of Revelation, the synagogue of Satan, which sums to 223. Satan equals 232 in Jewish Gematria. Skull and Bones uses the inverse of 223 on their emblem, and as we see here, adding 223 to 232 to 322 gives us 777. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, equals 331 when reduced. 636, as it is listed in the Bible, sums to 133 in reduced, and 313 in ordinal. As we saw, 331 plus 133 plus 313 also equals 777. Number of the beast sums to 66 in reduced, and 1044 in Sumerian. The number of a man equals 66 in reduced, and 156 in ordinal, just like 33. 666 when written out equals 156, also like God in Sumerian. And let there be light, one of God's first commands in the Bible, sums to 156. Let's fast forward a bit to the present day and discuss how all of these Saturnian numbers remain significant, using the campaign of our made-for-TV president, Donald Trump, as an example. Donald Trump ran his presidential campaign by the numbers of Saturn. But first, he wrote a book called The America We Deserve. This phrase sums to 90 in reduced. 90 is one of two numbers that sum to 33 when spelled out. The book was released on January 15th, or 1/15/2000. 1 plus 15 equals 16, which is the other number that sums to 33. January 15th, 2000, when written out, sums to 343 in English ordinal. Of course, 7 times 7 times 7 equals 343. He officially announced his candidacy on June 16th, 2015. From that date to the date of the election on November 8th is exactly 511 days. Donald equals 119 in Jewish Gematria, and Trump is taking office with the 115th Congress. Both of the assassination scares that occurred while he was on the campaign trail came in Nevada. Nevada equals 115 in reverse ordinal. It's the only state to have this number in any of the standard ciphers. The first scare occurred in Las Vegas on June 18th, 2016. 6 plus 6 plus 6 equals 18, and 6 times 6 times 6 equals 216. Las Vegas, Nevada, when written out in English ordinal, equals 133, and 1105 in full English. This assassination attempt occurred on a date with a life lesson number of 33, and from this date to the election on November 8th was 144 days, including the end date. From this date to Inauguration Day, not including the end date, is 216 days. The second scare occurred on 11/5/2016 in Reno, Nevada. Reno, Nevada sums to 666 in full English Gematria, and 4599 in reduced and ordinal. These two numbers match the Gematria of the number 13 when spelled out. From the date of this assassination attempt to Inauguration Day, including the end date, was 77 days, or 2 months and 16 days. 2016 is the 63rd triangular number, and the assassination scares, as they were labeled in the media, sums to 63 and reduced. From Trump's birthday to his first full day in office was 221 days, which can also be read as 7 months, 7 days, or 31 weeks and 4 days. That means from inauguration to his birthday is 144 days. He was elected to this office on November 8th, which equals 151. So he ran his campaign for 511 days, was elected on a day that sums to 151, and took office with the 115th Congress. And it all adds up. On his first day in the White House, Trump was 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old. The mainstream media has been in sync with his campaign as well. In early 2016, a 33-year-old artist placed this tombstone in Central Park. Central Park equals 119. The date it appeared was March 27th. The span from this date to the date that Trump was announced as president, which was the 314th day of the year, was 227 days. Trump equals 25 in English reduce. You may recall how Tom Brady won his 25th playoff game, giving the AFC its 25th Super Bowl victory in the NFL's 97th season, the 25th prime number, by coming back from a 25-point deficit. The date of that game was 2/5, which was 2 months, 27 days from November 9th. This is also 88 days, and Trump in ordinal equals 88. From Trump's birthday to this Super Bowl was 7 months and 22 days. It was the 51st Super Bowl, and from 2/5 to 5/1 was also 2 months and 27 days. Does Trump really have this much to do with football? His full name in reverse sums to 220, and after this next slide, you will see why I will argue yes. The National Football League was established by members of Yale University's Skull and Bones. This first man is Walter Camp. He was tapped for the society in 1880. This second man is Amos Alonzo Stagg. You may be familiar with the Stagg Bowl, in which the two finalists in Division III play for the championship. He was tapped in 1888 at the age of 28, and 88 divided by 28 is the same as 22 divided by 7. Skull and Bones in reduced equals 41. That's the 13th prime number. Stagg was born on August 16, 1862, giving him a life lesson number of 41. Camp was born on April 7, 1859, giving him a life lesson number of 88. Amos Alonzo Stagg in Jewish Gematria sums to 1037, and we'll see how the 33rd prime number is 137. Football is played 11 on 11. 11 plus 11 equals 22, and Amos Alonzo Stagg equals 220 in reverse ordinal. This matches the Gematria of National Football League in English ordinal of 220. The master builder number, 22, has Gematria of 220 when written out. This is similar to Skull and Bones' reverse ordinal Gematria of 202, but perhaps more noteworthy is that Skull and Crossbones sums to 223 in ordinal. I was watching a Thursday night football game on September 29th, 2016 that had a final of 22-7. As the fourth quarter was winding down, I tried to figure out why the Dolphins weren't trying to score. Despite being down by 2 possessions, they were using almost the entire play clock with less than 4 minutes remaining, and would only throw passes short of the first down marker. Especially alarming was the time remaining at each snap. Here we see 3:03 and 2:23 in the game book, on 2nd and 16 and 3rd and 13 respectively. So what was happening? This date might look familiar. It's the one that leaves 93 days in the year, and as we reviewed, 29th of September equals 1776. I ran the teams and cities through the Gematrinator and was struck by the numbers I saw. First of all, Bengals equals 33 using single reduction, and Cincinnati Bengals equals 156. Dolphins in reverse ordinal sums to 119. And in full English Gematria, it equals 331. Miami Dolphins in Jewish Gematria equals 360, which I found most intriguing. A careful look at their logo reveals that exactly 12 rays of the sun are visible, as if the team was some sort of clock. Fascinated by this, I decided to use ProFootballReference.com's tool to find every game that ever finished with this score, and discovered that this game was the 12th ever to end 22-7. 5 weeks after this game, the Cubs won the World Series, and I strongly believe that all of these games had everything to do with their 108-year drought. Allow me to explain. The Chicago White Stockings, who are now the Cubs, went 22-7 in their first season of play in 1870. Chicago White Stockings equals 228 in ordinal, just like United States of America. The first ever 22-7 NFL game was played on 11/20/1921. This is the date that leaves 41 days left in the year. The date numerologies of this game had a life lesson number of 44 and full numerology of 71. These are the only 2 numbers that, when written out, sum to 144 in English ordinal. This date also had numerologies of 7 and 17. Of course, 7 times 17 equals our magical 119. This game featured the Chicago Staleys versus the Cleveland Indians. That's correct, the Cleveland Indians of the NFL. Chicago Staleys equals 57 in reduced, just like World Series. 95 years later, the Chicago Cubs would play the Cleveland Indians in the World Series. The 112th World Series ended on 11/2. 95 also equals 57 in reduced. So check this out. There was not another game played with a 22-7 final for exactly 30 years. Of course, it was 2 days off because the NFL only used to play on Sundays. But the date of this game was 11/18/1951. We might recall how the 1331st prime number is 10,957. This game occurred between the Redskins and Steelers on a date numerology of 45 and 99. This matches the number 13, as we just saw. Redskins in ordinal also equals 99, and Washington equals 130. The Steelers have quite Saturnian Gematria, as they sum to 31 in reduced and 103 in ordinal. The third 22-7 contest featured the Chiefs and Raiders on November 8, 1963. This date had a life lesson number of 38, and Raiders equals 38 in reduced. The time since the last 22-7 game was 4,373 days, and this is very close to 4,371 which is the 93rd triangular number. The stadium this game took place in has GPS coordinates of 35 north and 94 west. Summing those two numbers together gives us 133. Our fourth game featured the Rams and Falcons on October 19th, the date written 1019. Falcons is the only other team to have 119 Gematria. This game occurred exactly 11 years, 11 months, and 11 days after the last one. Of course, 11 times 11 times 11 equals 1331. Rams equals 51 in English ordinal, and this game took place on a date with a life lesson number of 51. Atlanta is on the 33rd parallel, matching one of the other date numerologies. You may recall that the Falcons have played in 2 Super Bowls, those being 33 and 51. And ATL in English ordinal equals 33. (22-7) contest number 5 had the Broncos and Raiders on September 25th, 1983. From the date of the last game was 7 years, 11 months, and 6 days. 7,116 is in a small little pocket, as it is before the 119th triangular number and after the 911th prime number. This game took place on a date with a life lesson number of 55, matching the Gematria of Los Angeles, the winner of the game. Mile High Stadium, where this game took place, has coordinates of 39 north and 105 west. Adding these two numbers gives us 144. This brings us to our sixth matchup, which took place on December 11th, 1988, in one of the 2 states that sums to 88, California. 88 has become familiar now in this presentation. Note the infinity symbol's similarity to an 8. 88 is representative of the cycle of time, as highlighted in the Back to the Future franchise, in which time travel occurred once they reached the speed of 88 miles per hour. From the date of the last game to December 11th, 1988 was 62 months and 16 days. Take a second to look at all of the different numbers associated with the date of this game. Each of them has been discussed up to this point, most of them in great detail, except for 111. But 6,216 is the 111th triangular number. That brings us to our 7th game. The Broncos and Bills played on 9/3/1995, leaving 119 days left in the year. As we recall, 3rd of September equals 93. From December 11th, 1988 to September 3rd, 1995 is exactly 351 weeks. Note how 351 is the 26th triangular number, matching one of the date numerologies of this game. Also, Buffalo equals 126, matching the date's full numerology. From September 25th, 1983, the last time a 22-7 game was played in Denver to this date was almost exactly 11 years, 11 months, and 11 days. The 8th 22-7 contest was between the Chargers and Chiefs on 11/12/1995, only 10 weeks later. This date had numerologies of 137, 119, 37, and 19, and Chargers equals 137 in reverse ordinal. The 9th 22-7 game was between the Bills and Texans on September 11th, 2005, the 4-year anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. This was the 33rd franchise loss for the Houston Texans. This date had numerology of 27 and 45, much like how Buffalo equals 27 and reduced, and Buffalo Bills equals 45 and reduced. This game took place 9 years, 9 months, and 30 days after the last one. This is also 513 weeks, and 513 is the octal of 331. Our 10th game featured the Browns against the Buccaneers on Christmas Eve 2006. From the date of the last 22-7 game to this one was exactly 13 days, 3 months, and 1 year. This was also 469 days, and see how 469 in duodecimal is 331. The 11th 22-7 game took place on November 16, 2014, between the Rams and the Broncos, and this was the third time each of these franchises has been in one of these games. This brings us all the way back around to our 12th 22-7 game in 2016 between the Dolphins and Bengals. This date had numerologies of 45 and 27, matching Miami in reduced and ordinal. And here are the numbers we saw earlier. So I have to wonder, did we just come full circle? Before making our conclusion, let's look at games that finished with a 31-8 and a 3-18 score as well. As it turns out, there's 2 of each of these types of games. First, let's look at the 31-8 games. The first one occurred on November 2nd, 1997, between the Bears of Chicago against the Washington Redskins. Washington Redskins sums to 112 in single reduction. From this date to the date that the Cubs won the 2016 World Series was exactly 19 years, or 228 months, like United States of America. But what's so significant about 19 years, or 6,940 days, is that this is exactly one metonic cycle. And this is also known as Anita Sideris, which sums to 393 in Jewish. This means that the next time the moon was in the same phase at this spot in the sky on a November 2nd was the same night the Cubs won the World Series. The second game with a 31-8 final was no less significant. It featured the Baltimore Ravens and the New Orleans Saints on December 19, 1999. From the date of the last Bears and Redskins games that I just talked about to this day was exactly 777 days. The date numerology was also 131. Championship sums to 131 in English ordinal. And when you add the yardage from each touchdown that was scored in this game, you get 131. This was also the 353rd day of the year. 353 is the 71st prime number. Recall how 71 is one of 2 numbers that sums to 144. And to win the World Series, the Cubs had to break a 71-year curse. Baltimore Ravens equals 93 with K, S, and V exceptions, and Baltimore Ravens equals 1044 in Sumerian. Maryland is the other state that sums to 88, and New Orleans Saints in single reduction has the same Gematria as Chicago Cubs in ordinal. Now let's look at games that finished with a 3-18 final. There are also 2 of these in history. The first of which took place on October 28, 1923, again with the Chicago Bears, against the Buffalo All-Americans. This date was exactly 93 years from the time that the Cubs came back home to continue the 2016 World Series. From the date of this game to the date that the Bears played their 31-8 game against the Redskins was just over 888 months. Cleveland Indians equals 888 in Sumerian, and they're the only team to have that number. The second 3-18 game was between the Pittsburgh Steelers and Minnesota Vikings on December 18, 2005. From the date of this game to the date of Game 7 of the 2016 World Series was just a shade under 131 months. Pittsburgh Steelers in single reduction equals 108, and if you add all the field goals that were kicked in this game, you get the sum of 108. For good measure, I looked up all of the games that finished with a score of 2 to 27. And what do you know, there was one, and of course it featured a team from Chicago. They played the Pittsburgh Steelers on December 22nd, 1957. This date had 91 date numerology, matching Chicago Cubs in ordinal. And if you add up the yardage from each score in the game, you get 112. Up to this point, we've seen all sorts of examples of how Freemasons run their operations so rigidly by the numbers, as if they are adhering to the strict rules of a religion. One must ask themselves, why would someone go through all of this effort? What's the point? These just have to be coincidences, maybe even spiritually invoked. I might be one of the first people to jump up and say that yes, absolutely, phenomenal things happen in our world by the numbers. Things that no individual or group of people could ever possibly plan, act on, and properly execute. I could fill another half hour talking about all kinds of insane random occurrences in my personal life, many of which happen by these same numbers I'm discussing in this video. But there comes a point where the line gets crossed, and it starts to become obvious that we are not witnessing the works of God, but instead the acts of men who are trying to play God. By now, I think it's safe to say that line has long been leapt over. In the final section of this video, we will look at a group for whom there is no shortage of opponents online. This group has been at the middle of some of the most outrageous, belligerent lies ever told by man. They call themselves the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, aka NASA. Might they too be playing along with this ruse? Before looking at the clear examples, allow me a second to review how much taxpayer money they have been handed since, well, let's look at the last 30 years. Since 1987, NASA has received over $450 billion of our money, with very few accomplishments to show for it, despite the, no pun intended, astronomical surge in computing technology since we supposedly sent people to the surface of the moon as far back as the 1960s. Now just think for a moment, what could have been done with that money? Would $450 billion in healthcare advancements over the last 3 decades be more beneficial than whatever NASA has given us in that time frame? To put this much money into perspective, at $100,000 an hour, we could have instead listened to Hillary Clinton talk non-stop for over 500 years. Oh, what could have been. NASA was officially established on July 29, 1958. Freemasonry in English reduced equals 58. This date had numerologies of both 59 and 95. 5 and 9 are the two numbers that sum to 42 in ordinal, like Freemason in reduced. This date also had 36 numerology. The 36th triangular number is 666, and in reverse ordinal, National Aeronautics and Space Administration equals 666. There is a 31 in the date numerology, no 13, but there is a 113 and the 13th prime number, 41. 113, of course, is also the 30th prime number. Remember how Saturn equals 30 in single reduction. NASA was established on the 210th day of the year. NASA equals 210 in Sumerian Gematria, and of course Saturn equals 21 in reduced. This date also had 94 numerology, and by writing the number 94 out, we get 930 in Jewish, like Saturn equals 93, and the sum of divisors of 94 equal 144. Now Saturn by far has the most rings of any planet. Planet in English ordinal sums to 68 and 226 in Jewish. Rings sums to 68 in reverse ordinal and also 226 in Jewish. The number 226 sums to 93 in English reduced. One day I was testing my app and typed over easy in randomly and saw that it summed to 1331 in Jewish Gematria. This blew me away because I never really understood why that style of egg was called that, but suddenly it made sense. The yolk in the middle is like the planet, and the egg whites are like the rings. It was like Saturn in a pan. So, wondering if anybody else had already made this connection, I typed over easy Saturn into Google to see what came up. And right away, I got this image. I thought, well, someone beat me to it and made this silly picture, only to click on the site and realize this came directly from NASA. As it turns out, NASA published this in January of 2010, claiming it to be an image of Prometheus, one of the inner moons of Saturn, taken by their Cassini probe. Now sit tight, because I'm going to give you plenty of reasons other than this crummy CGI to think this is a complete and total fabrication. Now let's first establish that NASA sums to 139 in Francis Bacon Gematria, which adds 26 to each capital letter. Freemasonry equals 139 in English ordinal, as does Grand Lodge in Francis Bacon, and America in reverse ordinal. Remarkably, this moon orbits Saturn at 139,000 kilometers. The article says it gets as wide as 86 kilometers, which is 53 miles, and adding 53 to 86 gives us yet another 139. Prometheus in single reduction equals 59, and Cassini was 36,000 kilometers away. This translates to 23 miles, and 36 plus 23 equals 59. Let's look at the gematria of some of the phrases they chose to use, such as Saturn's skillet, which equals 226, like planet and rings. They describe the moon as having a pockmarked, irregular surface, which sums to 1440 in full English gematria, as does raw, unprocessed image. The width measurement they give was at its widest point, which equals 223, and the science team is licking their chops, which sums to 511. But the kicker on this page is one word that's in quotes, and we'll see why. The term excellent sums to 45, 45, 90, and 180 in the standard reduced, ordinal, and reverse ciphers. Add these numbers up, and we get 360, like the number of degrees in a circle, and we'll see why this is by design. But first, let's take a quick look at some of these other terms. A lot of Saturnian numbers here as well. NASA's Science Mission Directorate equals 130, as does United States and European Endeavor. The Cassini Equinox Mission equals 310 in ordinal. Pasadena, California, the location of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, equals 77, as does one of the other cities NASA resides in, which is Boulder, Colorado, and Boulder equals 77. Jet Propulsion Laboratory, of course, sums to 119 in single reduction. The date that this picture was taken was January 27, 2010, which sums to 156 with the S exception. The date numerology was, of course, Saturnian. We had a 13 and a 31. One of the more awkward phrases in the article was when they referred to the moon as porous, icy-bodied. This sums to 81 in reduced and 180 in ordinal, and here's why. From NASA's date of establishment on July 29, 1958, to January 27, 2010, the date of the picture, is exactly 18,810 days. This can also be read as 51 years, 5 months, and 29 days. And 51,529 in octal is 144,511, and its square root is 227. A full circle indeed. These three images all arrived at Earth at exactly 1331 in military time. They were all received on October 13th, but the one on the left was from 2004, and the other two are from 2015. This first image was taken on October 12th at 1449, and received on October 13th at 1331. That's a duration of 22 hours and 42 minutes, 42 minutes is exactly 7/10 of an hour, so this time was 22.7 hours. This second photo was taken on October 12th at 8:52 in the evening and received on October 13th, also at 13:31. That's a duration of 16 hours and 39 minutes, which is also 999 minutes. This other picture was taken a minute prior at 20:51 on October 12th, 2015, and it was received on October 13th at 13:31, which is just 1 minute more and a duration of 1,000 minutes. And now for a full, complete exercise in numbers. NASA released this video on September 15th, 2016. The footage was taken over a span of 44 hours, beginning on April 25th, which was 144 days earlier. 44 written out equals 144. This means that from September 15th to the next April 25th was 223 days. The title on this video, 4 Days at Saturn, appropriately sums to 223 in English ordinal and 2203 in full English. The page was published on a date with a life lesson number of 33, but it also had 31 and 51 numerology. From the date of NASA's establishment to September 15th, 2016, was 21,233 days. 233 is the 51st prime number. The start date, 25th of April, sums to 233 in ordinal. The other dates are significant too. 26th of April sums to 93 in reduced, and April 27th equals 256. 256 has a sum of divisors of 511, the only number that does. Let's examine the numbers they use in this article. First off, they say Cassini was 1.847 million miles from Saturn. Unlikely this is a real measurement. Just look at its sum of divisors, which is 4,324,320, or 432,432,0. Next, we're told the image scale is 355 kilometers per pixel. 355 has a sum of divisors of 432. We see 355 in Saturn's escape velocity, which is 35.5 kilometers per second, and its rotation velocity, where 35,500 kilometers per hour is given. This is just part of a continuous pattern of coding numbers into astronomy. See how Milky Way equals 119 and 1,770. The sum of divisors of 1,770 is 4,320. Why is 432 so important? 432 times 432 equals 186,624, and the speed of light is reported to be 186,282 miles per second. That's a difference of just 324. By the end of the footage, we're told Cassini is 171,000 miles closer to Saturn than it was at the start. This number has 96 divisors. 171 miles is 275 kilometers. The factorization of 275 is 5 times 5 times 11, but even more symbolic is that the 275th prime number is 1,777. Adding 171 to 275 gives us 446, which simply factors down to 223 times 2. All these numbers, but they still weren't done having fun with the GOI. Let's look at this silly sidebar, where you can download their ridiculous cartoon. First thing to notice is the runtime of 42 seconds. Nice. But how about these video sizes? First, a 322, and then a 331. Next, a 174, which they like because the 174th prime number is 1033. Last on the list is 371, which is another number whose divisors sum to 432. These videos all have a resolution of 1280 by 720, meaning there's 921,600 pixels, a number whose square root is 960. But if we take all of these video sizes and separate them by the periods instead of the lines, we get a few more fun numbers. First is 32, our circle and America number, then a familiar 233, and then 117. This matches the count of divisors up here. Saturnian in English ordinal equals 117. And the core temperature of Saturn, which is a pretty funny thing to claim to know, is reported as 11,700 degrees Celsius. The final number we can create here combines the last two chunks, and we saw this number earlier on in the video. It's 4,371, the 93rd triangular number. And just for good measure, 371 sums to 930 in Sumerian. And with that, the presentation will conclude. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you very, very much for watching. I hope this contained a lot of useful information, and please do share this video with anyone you think may benefit from the knowledge within. We need to take this world back from the establishments that just steal our money and lie to us about what they did with it. Please visit and bookmark Gematrinator.com. Now that this presentation is done, I'm going to be working on the next generation of the website that is sure to once again revolutionize the world of public Gematria research. I've linked to the calculator below, as well as Desi's blog, which contains many more decodes of bogus NASA publications, in addition to various news stories, commercials, and TV shows. You will also find a link to allfortruth.com, a new, secure community for people who are working to expose this corrupt power structure and think up more ways to spread the knowledge. Thanks again for watching, and have a blessed day.